Good morning, everybody. We are going live today with one of my dear friends, James Gaffigan, who is a famous conductor. James has conducted all over the world. He's conducted in Europe. He's conducted in America. He is currently the conductor in Luzerner. Let's see if we can find James in the chat here. And let's see. He's going to join in a second. We've got a lot of great questions for him. I want to say hi to Reed Scraper. I want to say hi to Frank. Hey, good to see everybody. Eric Reed Horn, good to see you. Let's see if we can find our friend here. Any tips on getting a double buzz? Well, we'll talk about that in our next horn class. Horn Emmett, thank you for asking. Next horn class. Hey, there's James Gaffigan. Let's invite him to the chat here. Okay. And we will find James Gaffigan. Okay. And invite him. Waiting for James to... Yeah, Jimmy. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I love calling him Jimmy, but, you know, he's an old friend of mine. We went to Tanglewood Music Center together. Hey, James, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going, Dave?
Fantastic. So we were at Tanglewood together in 2003.
That's a long time ago.
It seems like, I know it does seem like ages ago, but I mean, it's so great to like still be friends and to get to work together.
It's
really
emotional, actually. Every time I see you, I always tell you how proud I am of you. It's amazing what you've achieved in, 2 decades from when we first met.
I mean, you too. I was reading your bio, and it's tough because I see you as a music director, like when you come in, and I don't know all the places you've been. And we're also friends, right?
Yeah.
So when I read your bio, I was getting nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, you've conducted everywhere.
No.
I mean, you're the chief conductor in Zurich, or sorry,
Luzerner. Yeah.
Luzerner, and then you're principal guest in the
Netherlands.
Radio.
Yeah, but it's amazing to see you. I've seen you in Dallas. I've seen you in Chicago. I've seen you on many different orchestras, actually. I've seen you in the New York Phil. I've seen you on TV with Berlin. It's amazing. Amazing.
I guess we've been around, haven't we? So
we have.
How did your career take off after Tanglewood? I mean,
I think the key was I had some key people in my life that took care of me and looked after me, like people like David Zinman, people like Michael Tilson Thomas, people that took an interest, Franz Welser-Most, for example, in Cleveland. These people kind of protected me from getting in front of, let's say, the big orchestras too soon. And then I had some great assistantships, working for Cleveland Orchestra and San Francisco Symphony, watching the great conductors come through and conductors that didn't have such a good time come through. You learn what to do and what not to do and how the orchestra reacts to those things.
Yeah, well, could you talk a little bit about what it was like to be in Cleveland? And I mean, that's it's known as one of the most precise orchestras, one of the most polished, refined. I mean, those are the description words that I think of when I think of Cleveland. But I also think of like tradition, style, and
I think they have a really amazing, a high standard. And I think that comes from musical ideas. It also comes from transparency and precision. And I think, working for them for 3 years, I had a sound in my head. I had a really good image of what an orchestra sound should be and what we should concentrate on. And also they were lovely people. Like they all treated me like family from the beginning. So in a way, people always ask me, who was my teacher? I say the Cleveland Orchestra, because, a couple of people would pull me aside. Steve Rose, principal second violin, would say, hey, Jimmy, don't subdivide that passage. We don't need you to do that. You're just getting in the way. Or, certain brass players would tell me, don't even look at us at that point. We'll play too loud, So kind of funny things like that. You only learn by knowing these people in the orchestra. And so hanging around them, I mean, I got to learn a lot. They came very prepared to the first rehearsal all the time. And then it was a challenge, I think, for many conductors to come in. What are they going to do now? Like, what are they going to, after that first reading, what are they going to do to make them sound any better? And I love that, because then when the chemistry clicks, it does get better and more interesting. And I just think they're a nice bunch of people.
Wow. Could you talk a little bit about, I mean, well, first of all, I'm going to back up and just say how great that is that, number one, you were approachable enough as a conductor to, like, for a musician to come and talk to you and say, hey, like, try this or don't try that. And then
Yeah.
number two, you're able to say, wow, I'm going to listen to this. And
Yeah.
that's like the sign of kind of like, a lot of growth is where you're able to, like, assess and listen and then take what works and then leave what doesn't. So I think
I
that's
think
a
you hit
great.
the nail on that. You'd be a great conducting teacher, Dave. Like, it's like you need to know when to stay out of the way and when to leave someone alone and when to help them. And I think many young conductors start off by talking too much, and they start by wanting to prove what they know about the score. And that's a dangerous thing, because you've got these musicians in front of you that have been doing it for double the amount of years that you've been living, in some cases. And so I have a lot of respect for you guys that make sound, because in the end of the day, I don't make sound. And I think trust is the key. And I think I know that's a very broad statement, but I think when musicians trust one another in chamber music, or conductor and an orchestra musician, wow, that's when the magic happens. Because when you have these personal conversations, like you say, if you give the musician the feeling that you trust them, they'll trust you. And then some really interesting musical things can happen. If it's just fear, or if it's just, let's say, it's your way or the highway, or the conductor has the final say, I think that's a dangerous thing. I think the greatest music doesn't happen in that way.
How do you come up with like a strategy, number one, for like rehearsing? So imagine you come with this idea that you've already have formed. How do you like what's your first reading like? Or do you just read through a movement? Do you read through the whole piece?
I think the most important thing is you keep the big picture in mind. So for example, if it's a Bruckner symphony, or even more abstract, like a Prokofiev symphony, you should have the form and the big picture, and then slowly hone in on all those details. And I think in your mind, I'm just talking about preparation, but I think the very first thing you do when you're in front of an orchestra is listen to what they have to offer. And that's something that I think many people forget. The orchestra has a lot to offer in the first reading. And then the biggest thing I always share with my young conductor colleagues, or my assistants, or people who are interested in conducting, you should assume that the musicians know that they made a mistake. If there's a mistake in that first reading, assume they know they made that mistake. And when you come back to it, if they do it again, that's when you address the problem. The worst thing you could do is jump on someone after one time. I mean, that's a really bad move. And I think the musicians won't respect you in that way. But as far as preparation, yeah, I mean, I study a lot. I read a lot about the piece and what other pieces the composer's been writing at that time. I read about what else was going on historically in that time. I'm interested in the harmonic structure, and just basically it's all about predicting things. And it's like, you should know what the harmony is going to be before the orchestra plays it. So then you have a chance to correct someone if there's a mistake. And then the musical, I mean, what are we doing in the end, Cooper? We're doing justice to the composer, right?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
not about us. It's not about
service.
us.
Yeah. Wow.
It's service. And I think you know that too. And I mean, there are times when we get self-indulgent, and that's nice, but it's also very dangerous. I think if we take time in a horn solo, or if we take time as a conductor, we should probably have a good reason why we're taking time.
Not just because it feels like it. I saw that.
Yeah. Well, look, we're all guilty of that. We're all guilty of it.
Yeah. When you approach a piece of music for the first time, all right, first of all, how do you choose the piece? I mean, is it chosen for you? I mean, it's like 300 years of some of the greatest composers. I mean, like thousands of pieces. How do you choose a piece?
It all depends on the orchestra you're working with, how many times you've been there as a guest, or if you've been music director, or if it's a youth orchestra, the level of the orchestra, all these things come into play. And I think you need to be realistic and not selfish as a conductor. Like, I want to conduct Mahler 7. Like, yeah, we all want to conduct Mahler 7, but it has to be the right level orchestra. It has to be an orchestra you have a relationship with already.
Yeah.
The budget. Whereas I think the budget, the extra brass players. But I think at the end of the day, you choose repertoire that you love and that you want to share with people. And I think, I mean, I don't know. every situation is different. I mean, when I come to Chicago Symphony, you know, if it's my third or fourth time going, I could be a little more adventurous and push the boundaries. But I think the first time I tried to play it safe, I tried to, or let's say the second time I was coming, I wanted to do a piece that the Chicago Symphony didn't know so well. So I did Prokofiev's Cinderella. I did kind of 45 minutes of my own arrangement of the ballet music, but I knew they didn't know it. So that was a safety in a way, because they weren't going to say, oh, here he comes to do, you know, Mahler 5. What does this guy have to say compared to Barenboim, Schulte, and everyone else and their mother? I think for me, for young conductors in their 20s and 30s, it's very important that they choose the right repertoire, and also repertoire they love, that's not pushed on them necessarily.
Well,
I mean,
it's like,
I had a
if
problem.
you love it, it's convincing, right?
Yeah, I think so. But
Yeah,
sometimes we
absolutely.
love things that we're not very good at. You know, for example, I love Rameau and Lully, but I'm not going to touch it with a major symphony orchestra unless it's my own orchestra and we can have an honest conversation. I think
Yeah.
it's dangerous. You know, we're not all specialists in everything, and I think we
Yeah,
have to
wow.
admit what our strengths and weaknesses are.
So could you, now once you decided the piece, how do you start to learn it? I mean, how much time does it take to learn a piece, and like where do you go? Like
Yeah,
to
it depends. Like for example, if it's a new Mozart symphony, most likely you've learned plenty of Mozart symphonies.
yeah.
If if and so the pattern, it comes very clear very soon. It becomes very clear very soon. But I think if you're doing an abstract piece, like let's say a lesser known symphony of, like if you do a symphony of Charles Ives for the first time, there's a lot of research that needs to be done. And I think you should start very early. And same thing with an opera. You know, if
Yeah.
you're doing an opera, you have to start at least a year in advance as far as translation, listening to many different recordings as way back as they go, for language, I mean, there's so many things that come into play with an opera. But a symphonic poem, like a Strauss symphonic poem, the first time I did Alpine Symphony, for example, I was intimidated by the size of it.
Yeah.
And there was nowhere I could do it in a safe place, because the safe places don't have the budget to do Alpine Symphony. So I did my first Alpine Symphony with the DSO in Berlin, the Deutsche Sinfonieorchester. But it was great. It was really great. But I was shocked by the sound coming at me in the beginning, because nothing could prepare you, no matter how many recordings you listen to or how much you study, nothing could prepare you for that first moment of hearing all of that sound at once.
Yeah.
And so I guess a short answer to your question, you have to start very early, but nothing can prepare you for standing in front of an orchestra for the first time and hearing that for the first time.
I mean, it must just be like the greatest feeling in the world. I mean, I can't imagine.
Yeah, but it's a lot of responsibility, and you can't just get excited up there. It's not what it's about. I mean, you have to stay in control and help people and not go overboard. It is a great feeling. I think it's the best seat in the house, what I hear.
To hear, yeah, absolutely, yeah,
It's
exactly.
not always the most balanced place, but
Yeah.
it's pretty emotional. For me, the most emotional thing about it is watching you guys interact and make the music. I have the best seat in the house, the physical seat. Like
Yeah.
I am surrounded by the greatest musicians, and they're moving together and breathing together. There's nothing like it. Truly, there's
Well,
nothing like it.
how do you know? All right. Well, first of all, every gesture is a sound, right? Like so, like you can change if you move hard, the orchestra will kind of respond quick.
Yeah.
Or if you do something tiny, the orchestra will be very quiet and precise. How do your gestures shape the sound?
Well, I think in the first reading with an orchestra, that's the test where you see, is the orchestra paying attention to me? And if they are, how much? When you take information away, physical information away, how does the sound change? And I think
Mm,
every orchestra is different. A youth orchestra isn't going to be like the Chicago Symphony.
yeah.
Their reaction time is different. They need a lot more than you guys need physically from the
Mm,
conductor, precision. I think with gestures, they all mean different things, but every orchestra reacts differently. I
well,
remember, a big lesson of mine when I first conducted in Vienna State Opera. It was most of the members of Vienna Philharmonic playing. It was La Boheme, and the concertmaster who had since retired, came to me in the canteen, at intermission and said, young man, you know, you're very clear, but you're a bit too clear for us. We don't need all the clarity. Let us figure out where to put the notes. Show us where we're going and when to start, and everything in between we'll take care of. And I thought
Wow.
that was an amazing lesson for me. And that doesn't go for every orchestra. I mean, some orchestras want clarity all the time. They say, we need to know where to play, how loud, how soft. So I think everywhere is different, and it's a game. It's like going on a date with someone. The chemistry is there or it's not. And the second date is usually the one to show if this has potential or not. And I think that's my case with many of the orchestras I love.
And you have to be really flexible, really able to like adjust and kind of improvise on the spot, right? You just have to be really quick at taking in information and then responding. Yeah,
it's multitask. I mean, I'd lie if I say I was a great multitasker. Like, I can't talk on the phone and deal with my kid at the same time. I can't do two things at once. However, when there's a dangerous thing happening at the opera house, I love handling that situation. Like, I find it, I get off on it. I get high from exciting. It because I need to stay calm and make sure we all are okay. So I really love that, honestly. And it's multitasking to a very high level, but I love it. I see, it's like you need to live in the moment, see into the future, predict what might happen into the future, and then who needs help in that moment, and who do you leave alone in that moment. It's like with horn players. Some of them like to be looked at, some of them don't like to be looked at. Some of them, if you do this, they'll hate you for your entire life. So I like to feel
a difficult bunch.
No, but you're a brilliant bunch. And you know, even the most difficult horn players, I have such deep respect for them. So I kind of want to back off and say, like, what does this guy or gal need in this situation?
We're the stunt men and women of the orchestra, right?
That's true. And I want to make your life, I want to catch you. When you do those somersaults in the air, I want to catch you. I don't want you to worry about looking at me, or I don't want you to worry about, you know, how soft, you know, you need to play. I want you to do what makes you comfortable. And every horn player is different. I've had some of your colleagues say, please look me in the eye before you start Bruckner 4. I've had some of your colleagues say, don't even look in my direction when you start Bruckner 4. And I think that's a personality thing. And I think we as conductors need to respect that.
Wow. Okay, so backing up, the orchestra has, I mean, 100 up to 100 members, right? 50 to 100 members, and at any one time you could have 25 or more individual parts being played, right? You've got the 8 or 9 winds, right? If you have three bassoons, you've got 2 clarinets, 2 oboes, 2 flutes, maybe a piccolo, that's like 10. And then in the brass, you've got 4 horns at least, and then you have 3 trumpets, 3 trombones, and a tuba. So you're at, like, just with the winds alone, you're at close to 20, maybe over 20. And then you've got 5 different string parts, right? You've got first and second violin, viola, cello, bass, and then timpani, and who knows what other percussion. That's well over 25 different layers of music at one time. And then
but then I mean, but then the first thing you do as a human being is you put people into categories. You kind of makes, like, there's the string section, there's the woodwind section, there's the brass, there's the horns that kind of, you guys are living in between the woodwinds and the brass, and then there's the percussion family. So you make these groupings right away. You know, whether you've studied music or not, you realize that these are families of instruments and they play together. So I mean, then you're able to kind of make a pattern out of it. Life is all about patterns and predicting patterns. So the score is very intimidating, all those people, but you know, we have to make sense of it somehow and deal with it in the moment.
Could you tell me a little bit about what do you prioritize? So obviously there's, you know, as a horn player, there's 3 ways I could play. I could be a soloist, I could be a horn tutti or brass tutti, or I could just be simple accompaniment.
That's a great question, and I always address that with younger players of youth orchestras especially. I mean, I think we have to be a chameleon. I mean, so do you as a solo horn player. There are times when you're playing as part of the section and you're blending, and there are other extreme solo moments like Mahler 5th or Brahms 4. or Brahms too, excuse me. I think you have to know when to be what. And I think what you need to know when to be out there and, you know, taking risks, making music to the extreme level, and when to blend with your colleagues. And I think that only comes with experience and time.
How
And
do
I
you
think,
prioritize that when you look at a score that's like all these different lines of music?
well, I think after, like I said before about patterns, it becomes clear when something jumps out. And the brilliant
Mm,
composers like Strauss, Debussy, Mahler, you know, Mozart, you realize even just by looking at it that that's more important than everything else at that moment. And then you have to prioritize balance. And I think the
mm.
greatest composers help you because their orchestration is brilliant and you don't
There's
have
so
to
many
worry
clues.
so much. Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of clues in the parts, especially with Strauss. I mean, Strauss wrote
it's
everything. I mean,
genius.
yeah,
But there are
and the Mahler.
layers of Strauss. And for whatever reason, I was just talking to someone about this in this interview for this guy in the radio in Switzerland about Rachmaninoff. Rachmaninoff gets a bad name in the same way that Bruckner gets a bad name. Like Rachmaninoff is known as kind of like sweet Hollywood movie music, like kitsch music. Bruckner is known as heavy and loud and repetitive and boring. That's a shame because both of those composers are getting a bad rap. Rachmaninoff was a brilliant orchestrator, but for whatever reason, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s, his music was recorded in a very thick, um, overplayed, over schmaltzy way. Um, but he's very precise with his writing, just like Strauss. You know,
Mm,
the transparency of the writing is brilliant. Bruckner, for whatever reason, has become louder, louder, heavier, heavier. But that's not what Bruckner was about. That's
yeah,
not, he was about singing and he was a sonic architect. He had
wow.
layers of sound, and it's the closest thing you come to meditation in the
Mm,
music world.
yeah,
That and Bach, certain Bach. And I
yes,
just think, whatever reason, these composers, it's our fault, not me and you, but, you know,
yeah,
musicians that just think they make a decision about this music and then they stop looking at what the composer's given us on the page. It's like,
yeah.
oh, Bruckner's loud and heavy. No, it's
It's
not.
like, well, that tradition, like, where do we follow tradition and, you know, get stuck in tradition? And then
Yeah.
where do we say, hey, this is what the composer wrote, and then here's my own personal take on it? Like, how do
Yeah.
you determine those three things?
Well, it's a balance. I mean, there are many people that say it's 50% you, 50% the composer. And
Mm,
then there's some people have different equations. For me, I really think it should be 100% about the composer. However, I've had life experiences. I've had good things happen to me. I've had bad things happen to me. And you can somehow understand the music differently, not interpret it differently, let's say. But I think like certain things are so sad to me in Schubert that weren't sad to me 20 years ago.
mm,
Um, I could say the same about Mahler symphonies. The Mahler symphonies that I loved when I was 19 are very different from the ones that I love now. But I don't think we should necessarily play, you know, suddenly take more time at certain moments because of
mm.
our life experiences. I think the
Wow.
priority needs to be the information that the composer gave. And I think you might feel harmony in a different way, and you have every right to feel harmony in a different way when you're 40 than when you're 20 or 60 or 80. But I think at the end of the day, you need to keep in mind not to be too selfish and too self-indulgent, because I think it's important that these people have left us with this wonderful information, and we should recreate it in a very honest way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have so much repertoire, but it's some of the best music. One thing I'd love to talk about is classical music isn't steady in tempo, right?
Ah,
It's
no,
not static in tempo, and it's
no,
not static in dynamic.
no.
How how crazy is that? I mean, I
I
can't think of
love that. I mean, I love
many
that about
forms
what
of
we do.
music that we have now that are, I mean, there's jazz that's a little bit more free in tempo, but a lot of music has that steady beat. And that one of the
Yeah.
things about classical music, how do you interpret the tempo markings and the dynamic markings? Like,
Well, I mean, that was something that struck me. I mean, I came from a world of like rock music and popular music at first on the guitar. So I loved playing. I had a lot of favorite rock bands. I loved Nine Inch Nails. Like
yes,
I loved, you know, Jane's Addiction, all these like crazy music. I loved playing this music on the guitar, but like you said, most of this music has a click track. Whether you hear it or not, it doesn't matter. It's there. There's a rhythm. There's a solid rhythm. Usually the whole song has a solid
Yeah.
rhythm. And I found that when I started falling in love with classical music, like you say, it kind of was weird to me, actually. Like, I remember the Beethoven fifth recording of Carlos Kleiber.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Deutsche Grammophon, and the
Like,
five
changed
and
my
seven.
life.
Yeah, and I thought, this is not the same tempo. The first movement has like 7 different tempos. And I didn't really understand why in the beginning. I thought that was weird. But then more and more I realized this music is living, and it has to breathe. Like you said, there's a give and take. There's a pull that can't be described. And I love that. I think metronome markings are definitely important, especially if it's the composer's hand. It's a guideline.
Yeah.
But I think in the time of Beethoven, especially, I mean, there's a lot of controversies about, you know, the metronome, and was it working? Was he drunk with his uncle trying to put metronome markings on all of his, I mean, or his cousin, whatever. I don't, who knows? But I think when you have a composer that writes a metronome marking, there's a reason why they write it. It's very important that it's a guideline. But I could name so many examples where you need time in that moment, because it will come crashing down harmonically if you don't give it that time, and you'll run right by it, and the audience won't even hear it, or the musicians in the orchestra. So I think you need to prioritize when that time is being taken, and if you're going to take it back or not. I call there's different rubato too, for the people listening that are not musicians. Rubato is a give and take of tempo and
It means
taking time.
steal.
Yeah, exactly. But it's whether you give it back or not. So for example, there's Frank Sinatra rubato, where he would always take a little time and catch back up, because that rhythm, that metronome is there. And a lot of jazz musicians are brilliant at stretching time and then bringing it back. But in classical music, there's a lot of time that's never given back. But usually the composer will write something at moments like that. I think otherwise it's a pretty good rule as a musician to always give it back if you take it, you know, in some way or another.
In life in general.
in life in general. Yeah.
Well, next time you're in town, I'll ask you to borrow $20.
Anytime. I trust you. You're one of the few I trust.
Oh man, thank you. Hey, could you tell me about being an orchestral conductor versus an operatic conductor? What is the difference? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think it's a personal choice whether you want to do opera or not. I mean, for me, I need to do opera. I love singers. I mean, no matter how crazy they are, I love them. I learn more from them than any other musician, because their body is their instrument. They breathe, and their body is making the sound. They have no instrument to hide behind. So I have a deep respect for them, and I want to make their lives easy, like I do orchestral musicians. I want them to feel safe. And, you know, I think you have to have a love for the voice and for singers. Otherwise, you shouldn't do opera if you're a control freak. Because if you're a control freak, there's going to be stuff that happens night to night at the opera house that you can't control. And you need to be okay with that. So, but I also think, to go more technically into it, you're a smaller piece of the puzzle, and you need to be okay with that. I think the biggest difference is there are just more people involved in the process. I mean, in the opera, there's a set builders, there's the stage hands, there's the director, there's the costume designers, the singers, the orchestra, the chorus. There's so much more involved. It's a dramatic presentation. Wow. Whereas the orchestra, you have just the orchestra and the composer to deal with. But I think the opera repertoire is incredible. I mean, we've talked about this. I think I love that the audience can't see me in opera. I love that I'm with the musicians down there, and we're kind of in our own club dealing with the situation on stage. Kind of like the heroes behind the scene, you know. I love that. And I like that the pressure is relieved slightly um, from
I
me
mean,
in that respect.
I would think it's like a little bit more pressure because there's more moving pieces, but it's again, you're
There,
more a facilitator as opposed to like kind of the face of the orchestra and the face of the
yeah,
sound.
uh, exactly. And I think, like I said before, I don't make sound, so I hate being the face of the sound.
Wow.
I think in the pit, when I'm with the orchestra in the pit of an opera house, I like very much that our music is enhancing what's happening on stage,
Mm.
and I like that we're not the focal point. You know what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
when I'm on stage, there's a lot more pressure that people are looking at me a lot more, and I don't necessarily like that. And
Wow.
I think I think every conductor is different. I think some conductors really love being looked at, and they like feeling that they're in control. But in the end, they're really not. And I think that's something that we all have to accept. And I think that rehearsals are a big part of that. You could do all the work, but then you need to let go.
Yeah.
Then the orchestra is really in control. You're helping or not helping the situation.
Well,
But
it's back with
yeah,
what you said about trust. You know, you want
yeah,
to trust the musicians, trust the work, trust the process, trust your preparation, and
yeah.
you know, and then also I think
Trust your preparation. That is brilliant what you just said. Trust your preparation, but then let go.
yeah, and if something happens, you know, like hey, you do all you can to fix it, and then if you know, and then you just stay in the present. I mean, it
Yeah.
must be a complete act of staying in the present, not worrying about the future, not worrying about like, oh my gosh, this you know this just happened or that happened like you know last year when I performed the piece.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's really difficult. We're all such sensitive people, and
Mm,
I think it's not about us in the end. And I think that's like the biggest. That's so hard for all of us. We all have egos that we're trying to ignore, and when you look at an orchestra, I always joke around. I call it a delicate ecosystem, where you've got all these characters in the orchestra. Some very happy and
yeah.
open and loving, some very cynical, angry musicians. But I think what I've learned at 40 years old now is that when there's an angry musician, when there's someone who is unhappy in their job, there's probably a reason why they're like that.
Mm.
It was either a horrible conductor or a horrible colleague or horrible parents or a horrible husband or ex-husband or boyfriend or girlfriend. It's not your job to know those things, but it's your job to accept that they're angry for a reason. They weren't born angry. So
And
I
it's
think the
not
only
personal.
thing, no,
It's
it's
not
not
personal.
personal.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
only thing you can do as a colleague or for me as a guest artist is to stay calm and listen to them and give them the time they need. If they want to say something aggressive, let them say it. But how you react to it is that's the important thing. If you go back and you're aggressive, it's not going to help. It's
These
like
are a lot of
it's.
like life lessons. I mean, it's
I,
like
I just learned
life
from the
lessons you learn
orchestra.
from conducting. Like not take things personally.
It's
Like
tough.
you know,
It's
trust the
hard.
people around you. You know, like
It's
stay
hard.
in the moment.
Yeah.
Like, could you talk about just kind of your life philosophy? Or like, I mean, it must be exhausting. Number one, to be on the road. Like I don't know, so many weeks a year, but also like how do you stay positive? How do you stay happy? Kind of like what fills your tank and how do you balance, you know,
Yeah.
this
Well,
you feel?
this whole pandemic is a blessing in disguise because I'm spending more time with my family than I ever have, and I love it. I'm cooking every day. We're
I'm sorry, we
hiking. Oh,
lost you there. Could you said you're spending more time with your family than you ever have?
yeah. I kind of can't see you oh, now I see you. Yeah. Yeah. I'm spending more time with my family than I've ever, and I love it. And cooking and hiking and playing around and yeah, I think it's important to have that downtime.
Yeah, I agree for
Should I
myself as well.
move to a different location?
No, you're perfect. You're back. Yeah, you just
Okay.
said, you know, spending time with your family, being outdoors, those
Yeah,
are types of things.
I think you need to balance. Everyone needs to balance in their own way, and I think not to take on too much. You know, it's very enticing. It's very exciting to say yes to everything, but
Yeah.
it's not a good idea.
Yeah, on my schedule, I can do this, 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 and this, and this. But then as I get older, I'm like, I got a lot of energy, but I can't do
Yeah.
everything, you know?
No, it's
So,
true. And I think you should only, as you get older, focus on things that you love, and that includes family, friends, not just music. And I think it's important. And it's
well, I feel for
it's all
me,
about balance.
it's really important to give back to my community and to, especially the community of musicians. It's really important to give back to young horn
Yeah.
players and people.
Yeah.
And what projects have you done as a conductor to really help out, people in the town where you're living or conducting?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's a priority for me to always go to some kind of youth orchestra every year, in one way or another. Like I've taken on a role as the music director of the junior orchestra at Verbier starting next summer.
That's awesome.
And I love it because they're so open and so brilliant people. I mean, but they're just like, it's a blank slate. We're starting
Yeah.
from scratch, and I love that. I love going back. I went back to my high school last year when I was doing La Boheme at the Met and conducted. I I've conducted at Juilliard a couple of times. Of course, New World Symphony, which is somewhere in between
Yeah.
academia and professional life. I've been there many times. Tanglewood and Aspen. I go to Aspen every other summer, and I really love helping these young musicians discover orchestral playing, but also young conductors, because I had so many questions when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, and I didn't know who to ask. No one had time for me, you know?
You
And I
talked a little
never
bit
want to,
about a mentorship, and
yeah.
who were some of the mentors in your life? Who
Well,
who
not
kind of
until I had a job. I mean, David Zinman was the first one to pay attention to me at Aspen. He said, "You've
but
got talent. I want to
Larry
help you."
Larry Ratcliffe,
No,
and
Larry Reckliff was my teacher. He's incredible. I mean,
he's a
Larry,
he's a mentor as well, right?
yeah, Larry is kind of a mentor of life. I mean, Larry's more than a conducting teacher. He's a
Wow.
brilliant and a wonderful man, a selfless man. And I've learned a lot from him. I was lucky to have him in my life. But as far as like in the, let's say like from my career perspective, there were people I wanted to talk to, but they had no time for me. And if I felt bad. So I always make it a point to accept emails or messages from young conductors, no matter what age, because um, I want to help. I feel I was stuck at a young age. I was so interested, but no one was willing to speak to me. I had Larry when I was 21 through 23 at Rice University,
Wow.
and Larry was extraordinary. And just he recognized right away that I was a lazy person, and he wouldn't let me get away with it. He would call me in the morning to make sure I was studying.
Yeah.
He'd torture me if I
Because he
didn't
knew how
know.
talented you were, right? He
I
knew it.
I mean, that's nice of you to say, and him to say. I feel like I'm just Jimmy Gaffigan from Staten Island, New York, but I feel like he recognized something in me. I think he might have been the first one to do so. I just thought it was, I thought conducting was kind of a game, and I just thought, it's not that difficult. And then Larry was the one to show me there's so much responsibility in this, and you better be prepared more than anyone in the room. Otherwise, they're going to eat you alive, and it's not worth doing. You're lying to yourself. And he was
Mhm.
just brilliant. He's a very kind soul, and yeah, we were just text messaging yesterday, actually. So
He's also
I miss him.
honest, which
Very honest.
I really respect that in a mentor. Like, it's difficult to tell somebody, hey, you're lazy. You're not doing all that you could do. Like, and
Yeah.
that, like, I mean, I have like maybe like one or two people in my life who will tell me point blank, this is how it is.
Yeah.
And you're not doing that. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that
It hurts.
reality.
It hurts in the moment, but you're so
It's
thankful for it later.
it's someone who really cares about you, who's going to be honest with you, and
I
that's
agree.
great
I
that you're
agree.
helping mentor young musicians.
Oh, it's a part of the process. I mean, imagine if it was a one-way street. How selfish would that be? If you go through your
Could
entire life taking, 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 and never giving back.
it's just like, I guess I can liken it to Christmas because, when I was a kid, I used to love getting Christmas presents, but now that I'm older, I
Yeah.
really enjoy the process of like finding presents and like giving them to other people. It makes me
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you're a good person, man. I always tell you that. I'm
oh, thank you.
always like spending time with you.
I do too, man. It was so nice having you in Chicago recently. Like you did Don Giovanni, and it was with Matthew. It was like one of my favorite
No.
performances of like the whole year. I
Oh,
mean, like it
oh,
just
I'm so
seeing you,
happy.
and just like the humor and the character and the music you brought out, and just, I mean, I was just so proud, but I was also
I
so
had an
happy.
amazing cast. I mean, I had all these incredible singers, Lucas Meacham and Matthew Rose,
Lucas
Majetsky,
is Lucas is online right now. Lucas is say hi to him.
Hi, Lucas. He's here?
Yeah, yeah, he's
No
right there.
way.
Can you
No,
see him on
he's
the conference?
brilliant, man. Not only is he a handsome devil, but he's got talent. No, he's a great guy. He's incredible, musical, just beautiful family, and just to work with him, have musician at that high standard with Matthew Rose. I mean, their interaction, and then McKinney jumping in at the end. I mean, it was just it was incredible. It was an incredible group of musicians to work with, and
And what a great
I
piece of music. What a what a unbelievable piece. I mean, it's like one of the greatest operas ever written.
yeah, absolutely.
Could we talk about the role of conductor versus the role of music director? And
Yeah.
I think you're expected to, as a conductor, wear all these hats of, like, balancing the orchestra and the music and finding your form and your inspiration and how you want to express that. But how does music director differ from conductor?
I think it's a much bigger picture. And I think you're dealing with a lot of people's lives as music director. I mean, the musicians, they're going to develop in a decade's time. Most music directors are there about a decade plus, plus or minus. And I think there's a lot that happens with an orchestra in a decade's time. Whereas when you're a guest conductor, they're 5 days to 7 days max. So I think you need to have a plan, a programmatic plan, a repertoire plan. What composers do you love that you want to introduce to the public and you want to introduce to the orchestra? How much do you want to diversify the repertoire? How much change needs to happen in the institution for it to be successful or to continue being successful?
Wow.
I think there are these dangerous questions, and they're difficult, and you need a great executive director to be partners with. You need a great artistic planner, artistic director, whatever title that may be. And you need to not be selfish. You need to, as a music director, you need to share the orchestra with other conductors, and you need to recognize what other conductors do well, if in some ways much better than you do. And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people. And I mean, my experience in Luzern of building an institution has been incredible. And I've had a great partner in my intendant, Numa Bischoff-Ullmann. He's just genius at artistic vision and fundraising. And that's the best combination. So I had a great partner, and the orchestra was game for learning a lot of different repertoire. The public was game. That took some time. The first 3 years, they were like, I would see them on the street at the market or on the bus in Luzern. They're like, that Schoenberg, never program him again. I said, okay. Or Wolfgang Rihm, I heard it once, I never want to hear it again. And but they were honest. And then in the end, we gained their trust that they'd come to anything. And it didn't matter if Marta Agrist was playing or there was a debut that they've never heard of, and there was a composer they'd never heard of. They still show up because we've gained the trust of the audience. And I think that's something that's really complex, and you need a great team. It can't just be one person.
Yeah.
But as far as guest conductor, you have a certain amount of time to accomplish something, those performances. You can't pretend to be music director in that week.
Yeah, you're fighting against the clock, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you've got this clock, you've got the time, and you've got to, you have to pick your battles. What is going to get fixed on their own? What do you need to fix in that moment? Are you wasting time tuning a chord? Or are you helping the situation? And no one's perfect. It's a guessing game. And sometimes you get it right and sometimes you don't. But I think you have to have the clock in mind and the level of the orchestra and how they're responding to you in that moment. If they're responding or not. Are they drinking the Kool-Aid? I think we're all in this together on stage, and we all want it to be a great performance, and we don't want to waste time. And I think in the end, it's like what we talked about early on, a lot of hard work, a lot of preparation, but then letting go.
Could you tell a couple stories about just some of your experiences traveling around conducting some of the great orchestras in the world? I mean, you've gotta have these moments where you're like, wow, this concert was a really great memory, or this didn't
Yeah.
work as planned, but somehow we managed to like not fall off the tracks completely.
Oh, there have been so many. I don't even know where to start. I mean, I I mean, the greatest experience, the greatest musical experiences are always the ones. I think Leonard Burns had an amazing quote about this. What is it? All great things come from a great idea, but not enough time to accomplish them, or so. I get something like that. I can't remember the exact quote, but I think that's been the case. Whether I had it, I remember having a big Mahler symphony event in a very famous place, and there was just two rehearsals, and the acoustic of this cathedral was so massive, and there was no way it was going to work. No way. And in the end, it was one of the most amazingly emotional performances. And even at the end of Mahler 2, we had silence that lasted like 30 seconds. That's never happened before in Paris. It was incredible, and it was a magical experience. Also with youth orchestras, I've had some of the most moving experiences. But for me to be specific, it's too hard. I mean, I've had a lot of really beautiful things happen in my life with different orchestras from all different levels, and I think you could never plan when it's going to be one of those moments or not. And I think in the end of the day, you give everything, and if you don't, the orchestra smells it. They recognize. The public does too. The public knows a great thing when they see and hear it, and yeah, I think it's a balancing act. But yeah, I've had many great things. I've had some funny things happen, and
you gotta tell one of those funny things. You're like one of the funniest people I know, and you gotta share. You gotta
no,
share.
I think if I share some of this is very dangerous. No, well,
you can share one. You don't have to tell
God.
where or who.
Okay. Well, two quick. Well, one story of an orchestra being pretty amazing is I was conducting an orchestra, and the bassoonist skipped 2 bars of a very famous solo with the orchestra accompanying it, and the whole orchestra, about 60 people, jumped ahead 2 bars. Yeah, to fix the solution. Yeah, incredible. I had a moment inside of my soul that said, we're going to stay apart for 2 bars for the next 5 minutes. But the orchestra all knew, and they all jumped 2 bars. It was extraordinary. But I'll tell you a story, a funny interaction. Like, people always ask me in interviews, do you ever have a musician talk back to you in a very nasty way? But I'll tell you a funny story. I won't mention the orchestra. Was doing Salome, the Salome's dance of Strauss, and there was a percussionist playing tambourine, and it was at the end of the dance, and the tambourine is going, and the whole orchestra is going, bum, 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 and the xylophone is in the C major scale. It's working like a machine, but the tambourine player keeps rushing. And I looked at him in the first rehearsal, and I decided, like my rule, assume they know they're rushing. Then we get back to it, he's still rushing, and I stopped. I said, tambourine, I think you're pushing forward. I tried to say the most politically correct way. I think in a perfect world, we should all be listening to you and with you, but could you just play on the back of the beat? And he looks at me, all right, yeah, okay, sure. So he's there again in the dress rehearsal the next day, rushing. And so I finished the piece, and I go back, and I said to him, look, I really think it's pushing. And again, he rolled his eyes. He said, is it pushing? Am I pushing, or is everyone else behind? And I said, you gotta be kidding me. So that's when I really lost my cool in that moment. And I'll make the language a little better now. But I said, you know what, if you could just come down to our level and stop being so brilliant, it will help us all, And he turned red, and he was laughing, and the whole orchestra started stomping their feet, because they all kind of knew that we were dealing with this character, this situation. And then backstage, he comes to my dressing room, and he goes, that was really funny, Gaffigan, but still, I don't think I was rushing. Isn't that amazing? I mean, but it just shows you he's living in his own world, and if 80 people around are staying perfectly together and he's ahead of them, yeah, that's life.
Oh,
That's
that's
life.
great. That's great. Do you have any
Yeah.
pieces that you want to conduct? Like, what are your bucket list pieces that you still want to conduct?
Well, a bit of really sad, well, it's not sad news yet, but I'm really worried about this summer, Santa Fe Opera. Everything's getting canceled, and who knows what's going to happen. I'll knock on wood, but it seems like everything's going to be canceled in the summer. But I was supposed to do Tristan und Isolde in this summer at Santa Fe Opera, and we have
Wow.
one of the most dream made casts ever imaginable. We have a dream director, a dream setting at Santa Fe Opera, one of the most beautiful places. And yeah, it's a shame because if it doesn't happen, it's going to break my heart. And I got these scores I'm staring at every day. Do I study really hard as if I'm conducting it, or yeah, it's difficult. So that's a dream piece of mine. If it doesn't happen this summer, I hope it happens. Pelléas et Mélisande of Debussy, the opera, is really on a bucket list. As far as symphonically, there's just a few pieces I'm still kind of waiting to do, but I won't touch them now, like Bruckner 9. I love Bruckner 9, but I won't. I've done 6 a lot, 4, 5, 1, 2, 7 a bunch, but 9 is something I'm just saving. I don't know why.
Wow. Any of the
Yeah.
Mahler symphonies that you're kind of like, wow, that's a bucket list Mahler symphony? I mean,
Well, I've never done. I've done almost all of them except for 3 and 8, and I would say 3 is a big dream of
wow.
mine. For many reasons. I think that other conductors love the piece and other musicians love the piece. But my favorite is still 4, actually. And
Isn't it? Isn't it great?
oh, it's
Yeah.
perfect.
Oh man,
Beginning to end, it's perfect. Yeah.
it's one of the few with 4 horns too. It's one of the few.
It's so magical. It's like it's his tribute to everything that's happened before, but also looking forward. And then the last movement is just killer. One of the most emotional things. I can't keep it together. If you've got a great soprano or, oh, it's just heaven.
Do you have any favorite recordings of? I mean, well, let's start with the Mahler 4. Do you have a favorite recording of that piece?
Not really. Of the Mahler symphonies are complex. Like I had many favorite recordings when I was younger, like at school, but now I don't listen to Mahler recordings anymore, so I don't know. But I
Do you
have
have any
different
favorite
favorite. Yeah, I think
recordings? Do you think?
Tristan und Isolde. I love Carlos Kleiber's with Dresden. Like that's because in a way he used the perfect voice, Margaret Price, who wouldn't have been able to sing it in an opera house, like because her voice wasn't big enough for somewhere the size of the Met or Vienna State Opera. But on a recording, it's perfect. So in the heyday of recording, that was the reason to record that because I mean it's perfect. It's perfect. I have other favorite recordings. I love Hera Vega's recordings of the Bach Passions and the Mass in B minor. I love period instruments for that stuff, and I learned so much from people like Harnoncourt and Hera Vega and Gardiner. Gardiner is just one of the most incredible minds today for period ensemble, and his Beethoven symphonies recordings, all the Bach cantatas. That's what really gets me excited. These period recordings, I love them. I
Like the
love listening
original
to things.
sound that the composer was like listening for.
Yeah, the
Like,
sounds that they heard.
yeah, that's
I
so
love
cool.
that.
We recently
But
had Matthew Rose here, and he did Beethoven 9 with the John Elliott Gardner Orchestra.
yeah,
So fun to
isn't
hear the
amazing?
horns. I was just like, yeah, so cool.
Yeah.
Lastly, do you have any favorite conductors? Any conductors that you like?
Yeah.
Just like, I mean, obviously you said Kleiber a couple times. Bernstein, is he up on your radar? I mean, as a New Yorker and
Of
a
course. No, of course. Leonard Bernstein. I mean,
kind of the Renaissance man.
he was incredible and incredible educator, incredible musician, impeccable rhythm. And some of the oldest members of the Vienna Philharmonic that I met say that the best Schumann they've ever played was with Leonard Bernstein, which I find amazing. I loved him. I never got to meet him, never got to see him in person, but I just adore how serious of a musician he was and how brilliant he was. And he could talk to everyone, the lay audience, musicologists, children, all at the same time. And
There's a
everyone's
great
fascinated.
story about Jaap van Zweden introducing him to the Queen of Holland. And he goes up, they're like, don't look her in the eyes. And he goes up with like a scotch in one hand, a lit cigarette, and he goes, Queenie! And he
Yeah,
kisses her on the
Queenie.
cheek, and everyone's like, oh! And she
Yeah.
loved him. But, you know, it's like the Queen of Holland. You're just like, oh!
I love that. I love
So,
that.
I mean, I feel like you could do the same thing, though. If you were to do
Oh,
Queen of England.
no, I just think there's so many great conductors today living too. Like I have so many colleagues that are brilliant, you know.
Yeah.
I just respect them so much. I'm friends with them, you know, like we're not ships in the night anymore, just not talking to one another. I think we keep in touch online or text message once in a while, and I think it's important because we're all so different. We all have different things to offer. And I think once jealousy gets going, it's a dangerous thing. I remember starting off and thinking, who the hell is this Dudamel guy? I'm so sick of seeing his hair everywhere. Like, you know, everywhere I look, I open up the New York Times, there's Dudamel. I would talk about something. What do you think about Dudamel? I was just like, God. But then I met him in Vienna. He's the most lovely person in the world. I've seen him in LA a bunch. Like, it's such a waste of time to be jealous of someone else's accomplishments, because that could be time you could use doing something productive
Or working with them or learning from them, right?
Something. You learn something from everyone. Like
Can I ask
I've
two
learned
questions in the last 3 or 4 minutes that we have? What advice would you give to new musicians, like young musicians, especially ones that might not have ensemble playing right now or lessons with a stay at home?
You mean a musician that's interested in playing in an orchestra, or in general?
In general, just young musicians.
Well, I mean, for me as a young kid, music was an escape from everything. I didn't have a bad life. I had a really good life. I had two very loving parents, and we didn't have much money, but music was my escape. When I went down in the basement and I played guitar, or if I was making up a song on the piano, that was my escape. I didn't know that I was going to become a musician, but it was clear to me at that moment that that was my favorite thing to do. And it helped me feel good, you know. It helped me feel something that I couldn't feel from my friends playing baseball, or let's say playing video games. And it became clear at a very early age that this was something higher. You know, I didn't understand why. I'm not a very religious person, but I knew that this music was from something bigger, you know, especially the music of Bach, Mozart, Haydn, you know, Sibelius, Mahler, this world. It became very clear to me. And I would say, lose yourself in this stuff, because it's only going to help you become a deeper person, and it's going to help you be a more sensitive person. If you feel the harmonies, if you feel what's sad, what's happy, what's scary, what's loving, you're going to become a more sensitive human being, and you're going to be a more open human being. So I would say for young people, dig in and enjoy it, and don't feel intimidated by what other people your age are doing, because we all have different paths. You know what I mean? Like, I was at the age of 13, I was playing Little League Baseball. I wasn't in a big youth orchestra. I wasn't taking lessons or anything like that. My parents didn't have money for that. But I was like crappy baseball player, you know, but I knew that music was important to me. I just didn't know which way and how I'd get to the place that I needed to be.
Lastly, I just want to say, you've touched on it a little bit, but why are music and the arts so important right now in this time of uncertainty?
It's a big question. I mean, I think so few people take moments to themselves. This is what I was talking about just now about young people listening to music. I think we could help them escape their pain and suffering. And I think we can help brilliant people, all different types of people, rich, poor, whatever color your skin is, whatever your gender, whatever you identify with. I think music can touch on something that wakes us up to being human. We don't need to be able to sing or play an instrument, but it's a basic human. We should have the right to this art form. And I think
Yeah.
if that disappears, it's a big shame.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to talk to you. I love you, brother. And dude,
Love
thank
you
you. I'm
too. Take care of yourself.
so happy to see you, man.
Miss you,
Thank you.
David.
It
Take
means so
care.
much to talk to you. Thank you all for watching. It's been a great day, and we'll see you all soon.
Take
Bye.
care.